All right, good afternoon to you. Thanks for staying with us. It's still Midday Live, and it's now time for us to do business. My name is Nanika Asari. This afternoon, we are talking about the Heritage Fund and why it was set up, and calls or proposals for government to use money in the fund for economic challenges. Exactly what are the issues? We will be speaking with the Director of Policy and Research at the Africa Center for Energy Policy, John Peter Amewu. But before that, let's go to the street and listen to what the public wants to say about the Heritage Fund. Part of Ghana's oil revenue has been set aside by an act of parliament in the Heritage Fund for future generation. Now, some people are suggesting that government uses this Heritage Fund to solve current economic challenges. So today we are asking you, should government really fall on this Heritage Fund meant for the future? What do you think?
I don't think the government should use that money or touch that money, because something set for the future purpose should be there for the, let me say, those who are coming to rely on. Because I think there's a lot of things that you can think to rely upon to solve these current problems.
Yeah, I believe during this crisis, it can be used for development that future generation will also come and benefit from. Instead of the money being there, who knows who will come and spend it or misuse those money sometimes to come.
There is this adage that when there is a stick and a dog wants to bite you, you don't allow the stick to lie down. Though it's a fund that has been earmarked for future use, but if the nation is in crisis and there's need for us to use it, that to correct certain things in the economy, I personally believe there's nothing wrong.
So it is the duty of a wise man to change his minds and decision. So if we feel that yes, we have some money there, can we invest it quickly and maybe put it back again? We can use it with flexibility.
There are so many avenues that government can generate income from, or is currently generating income from. Taxes that people are paying, companies are paying, institutions. So I believe government can fall on those incomes to better the economy and not fall on that one if it has been set aside for specific future purpose.
Oh, it's quite interesting comments and views there from a cross-section of the public, but we'll be looking at it now from the experts' point of view. We are in the studio with Mr. Amewu from the Africa Center for Energy Policy. Good afternoon to you, sir, and thanks for joining us on Midday Live.
Good afternoon.
I'm sure you listened to what a cross-section of the public said with this Heritage Fund. Let's first develop exactly what the law says about the fund in terms of access.
Well, thank you for engaging me in this very interesting discussion. First of all, the law establishing the Heritage Fund, it's contained in the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, right, which was passed by Parliament. Now, the rationale for coming up with the establishment of funds basically depends on certain criteria. Number one, the natural resources are depletable resources, which means that one day it will finish. And United States, for example, the corporate accounting principle considered natural resources revenue as disposal of assets. It is not a sustainable income of revenue. So it's not a revenue, it's rather a disposal of assets, such that if you have two cars and you sell one, you will not have the opportunity to have the other one. So basically, it is a disposal of asset. Number two is that the hog-like nature of the price doesn't make the revenue from this product to be determined and be specific, because at any point in time, there is some form of volatility in terms of the price movement, escalation. So it's very difficult to determine what the price of the crude oil will be in even 3 days or 4 days to come. That is number two.
Right. Now, looking at it from this angle, it's a fund being set aside for future generation. I'm sure it will be the next generation after myself.
Yeah, basically because of this behavior of the nature of the resources. That is why a fund is set aside.
Right.
There are two basically funds that are set aside. One is the stabilization fund, and the other one is the heritage fund. The heritage fund is for a store of value for intergenerational equity for the unborn yet to meet. The stabilization fund is for short-term measures. In fact, what the literature is not quite clear about is whether the revenue from these depletable resources should be invested immediately in public goods or in financial assets.
Okay.
And that is exactly where General Asiedu Mosquito is coming from.
So then I go to my next question. Proposals that government should use it to solve economic challenges. Are we moving in the right direction?
It's totally premature, and he may have his genuine call for that, but it's premature as a country to do that. Number one, the rationale for Ghana in particular, among these three scenarios that are put forward, Ghana's circumstances is quite different. And we think seriously that the rationale for putting up that fund for Ghana is as a result of the typology of economy in terms of the political economy in which we find ourselves. We don't have that fiscal discipline as a country. Political pressure on government to spend resources are quite high. As you speak today, our fiscal deficit is so huge. And so because of inability of government to sustain income and also to spend on priority basis, there is a need to control how you spend this fund.
Are we that broke to use a future fund?
I think for me, the call for General Mosquito is purely as a matter of frustration. Why am I saying this? The question is, how much is even the money? As far back in 2012, cumulatively, between the stabilization fund and the heritage fund, it's just about $94 million. As of 2013, December, we have recorded quite high amount because of the inflow from the tax that we paid. It rises to about 314. Okay, so together as we speak now, a minimum of 400 million, which is cumulatively between the stabilization and then the heritage fund. The heritage fund record less than 120 million as I speak. So what is 120 million going to do, even if you want to spend that? I think his call for the heritage fund is premature. If he's probably saying we must spend the stabilization fund, well, that makes some sense to me.
Okay.
But the heritage fund cannot be disbursed as of now. Number one, we don't have that capacity. The absorptive capacity of this economy is so weak. We have done some value reconciliations in terms of projects that our oil resources has been used upon. I mean, there's nothing good to talk about. Their cost overrun. Some of the monies from the oil resources are used to pay for extension of time claims. Projects have not been completed on time. The resources have been spent thinly on projects. 16 good infrastructure road projects were selected in the 2013 budget. And we have spending priorities of, say, 1 million Ghana cedis on some of these projects, which means that if you continue spending that way, it will take quite close to 20 years to finish some of these projects.
Mr. Mel, you have argued your point out quite clearly, but there are still more proposals for government to use this fund. Should the government consider these proposals, what happens to the future generation in terms of the heritage fund?
You see, the question we need to ask ourselves, do we want to build good roads and infrastructure for our future generation to come and use, or we need to invest the money for the future generation to come out and use the money for what seems good to them? For me, I'll be a class of group that would think that we need to spend now. But the difficulty of spending now is what I'm telling you. We don't have that absorptive capacity. Our spending priorities are wrong. Our technical skills to spend on projects are totally misplaced. All those road projects that I have enumerated, there is no single feasibility project on those projects that we have undertaken. Ministers use its own discretion measures to select the project. So the spending priorities are not right. Until we get that spending priorities right, I don't think the call for expenditure now is right. So we need to go back and build that capacity to spend. Let me give you this typical example. $34 million was given to Ghana government to spend on oil and gas capacity building. That money had not fully been disbursed. The question is why? Because we don't have the capacity to disburse.
So what would you advise government to do?
What I want to advise government currently is, number one, to look at the spending strategies in terms of the management of the fund. If General Asiedu Ketia thinks that the revenue in terms of the return, interest that is being paid on this money is so little that we need to spend it now, we must begin to diversify the portfolio of investment. Probably certain percentage, as done in some emerging countries, 50% can be invested internally and other 50% also to be invested outside. We can also look at currency diversification. Probably we can use the Chinese currency as one and United currency also as another, so that we can combine these diversification measures to get a higher yield on return for the investment.
The yuan has come up again in another discussion. It came up in saving the cedi, and it has come up in also securing the Heritage Fund. Thank you so much, Mr. Amewu. John Peter Amewu is the Director of Policy and Research at the Africa Center for Energy Policy, this afternoon discussing or analyzing the Heritage Fund and whether or not it should be touched. Well, his stand is simple. We shouldn't touch that money. That will do for business now. We have sports coming up next. More business update at 4:30 on Biz Brief. My name is Nani Kasari. Have a good afternoon.